They told her she was neurotic. They told her she was paranoid. They tried to erase her. They made one fatal mistake. They forgot who she used to be. Welcome to Revenge Mindset. Today we are narrating a story of betrayal so deep and revenge so cold, it will leave you breathless. If you love a story where the lamb learns to bite back, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button, share this with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. You must stay until the very end. Because the final act of this masterpiece of malice reveals a public execution you will never see coming and proves that victory always comes at a terrible price. Let's begin. The world's full of predators and prey. For 15 years, I played the good little lamb, right up until my own sister and husband led me to the slaughterhouse. Big mistake. They forgot that even a cornered lamb can learn to bite back, right for the jugular. Sits alone, a mask of calm on her face. It began, as most tragedies do, with hope. 3 weeks before my public execution, I was planning the party, my 47th birthday. I remember the weight of the pen in my hand, a heavy fountain pen Brian had bought me years ago. A gift for our 10th anniversary. He'd said it was for writing our story. He was more right than he knew. I was addressing the invitations, thick cardstock, the kind that feels important when you hold it. I wanted everything to be perfect. Perfection was my trade, you see. For 15 years, my entire world had been a curated stage of quiet, supportive elegance. I was a homemaker by choice, a decision I'd made when I left a promising career as a financial analyst. I convinced myself that building a family was a more profound investment. A home, I believed, was an architecture of love, and I was its chief architect. I managed the foundations, reinforced the walls, and made sure every room was filled with light. My mistake was assuming everyone else lived in the same house. I was reviewing the budget for the party. The restaurant was expensive, one of those places with more waiters than tables, but Brian had insisted. "Nothing but the best for you, honey," he'd said, a little too loudly, as if performing for an invisible audience. The numbers on the screen didn't add up. There was a large withdrawal, recent, that I couldn't account for. It wasn't the first time. For months, there had been discrepancies, small leaks in the financial plumbing of our lives. He walked in then, handsome and charming and utterly dismissive. I can still smell his cologne, something woody and expensive that always seemed to announce his arrival before he did. "What's that look for?" he asked. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who could sell sand in the desert. I pointed to the line item on the screen. "Brian, this withdrawal, it's significant. I was just trying to balance the accounts for the party, and—" He waved a hand, a gesture of casual erasure. "Don't worry about that. It's a surprise investment. A little something I'm working on." He smiled, that perfect, reassuring smile that had always been my anesthetic. "You have to trust me. When have I ever let you down?" My internal monologue was a simple one. He called it a surprise investment. He said to trust him. I always had. It was the truth. Before I met Brian, I lived in a world of numbers, data, provable facts. Numbers don't lie. They don't have hidden agendas. They are what they are. But I had traded that certainty for him. For this. The trust was the foundation of our home, the very floorboards I walked on every single day. I didn't know he'd already ripped them out from under me, leaving nothing but a long, dark drop. I remember closing the laptop. "Okay," I said. "Just okay." I let him believe his flimsy lie had worked. What else could I do? To question him further would be to admit that the foundation was cracking, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So I went back to my invitations. My parents. His parents. My sister, Nicole. The ink flowed from the pen, forming beautiful, perfect letters. A script for a life that was already a fiction. I called Nicole that afternoon, my younger sister, my confidant, the keeper of all my girlhood secrets. We'd built forts out of blankets together, whispered dreams into the darkness of our shared bedroom. Her voice on the other end of the line was like honey, thick and sweet. "Liz, I was just thinking about you. Are you excited?" I gushed. about the restaurant choice, the menu, the dress I was thinking of buying. I was a fool, a happy, chattering fool, decorating the gallows I didn't know had been built for me. "I'm so glad you and Brian convinced me to go all out," I said. "It's going to be so special." "Oh, it will be," she said. Her enthusiasm was a little too loud, a little too bright. It was the sound of someone overcompensating. "We are going to make this a birthday you will never, ever forget." Even then, a small part of my brain, the old analyst part that I had so carefully suppressed, registered the tremor in her voice. The slight strain. It was a tell, a poker player with a great hand trying to act casual. She was a bad actress in a terrible play. But I was her captive audience, and I didn't know the script was a tragedy written in my name. I chose to hear love in her voice. I chose to believe in the beautiful lie. It was easier. The lie became harder to believe a week later. I was getting ready for a charity luncheon. I went to my jewelry box to get my grandmother's ring. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was an heirloom, a priceless Art Deco piece that had been passed down through the women in my family for generations. It represented our strength, our resilience. It was my history, solid and sparkling on my finger. But it was gone. The velvet box was empty. I felt a cold dread wash over me, the kind that starts in your stomach and spreads to your fingertips. I tore the room apart. I checked drawers, pockets, the bathroom counter. Nothing. My mind was racing. Had I been robbed? Did I misplace it? The panic began to feel like a physical thing, a tightening in my chest. I called Brian, my voice shaking. He came home immediately, his face a mask of concern. He watched me frantically search, his expression calm, almost clinical. When I finally collapsed on the bed, breathless with fear, he sat beside me. He took my hand. His was so steady, so warm. "Honey, stop," he said, his voice soft. "I have it." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me weep. "You have it? Where? Why didn't you tell me?" He smiled gently, a patronizing, pitying smile. It was a surprise. "I took it to be professionally cleaned. For your birthday." He stroked my hair. "I was going to give it back to you at the dinner, all shiny and new." I stared at him, my relief curdling into confusion. "But you didn't tell me. I thought it was stolen. I was panicking." He sighed, a deep, theatrical sound. He shook his head slowly. "Melissa, sweetheart, look at you. You're getting so neurotic these days." He stood up and looked down at me, a doctor diagnosing a patient. "You worry about everything, the money, the ring. You need to relax. You're letting your anxiety run away with you." He made my concern feel like a sickness, a failing. He wasn't just lying, he was pathologizing the truth. He looked at me with such pity, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I saw myself through his eyes. Frantic, foolish, a broken thing that needed managing. I was the problem. My perception was the problem. The world was fine. It was my mind that was cracked. That was his greatest weapon. Not cruelty, not infidelity. Gaslighting. He was an artist of it. He could make you believe the sky was green and that you were insane for ever thinking it was blue. He had been laying the groundwork for months, you see, planting seeds of my instability with our friends, our family, telling them I was having episodes, that I was becoming terribly paranoid. He wasn't just planning an affair, he was preemptively discrediting his only witness. And I, his star patient, apologized. I actually thanked him for being so thoughtful. I felt ashamed of my panic. That shame was the final nail. Which brings us back here, to my birthday dinner, their masterpiece of malice. They had insisted on planning it. They'd invited my parents, Brian's parents, our closest friends, a table for 6. And then, one by one, they had called each guest. A different lie for each. My mother had a sudden migraine. Brian's father had a flat tire. Our friends had a sick child. Fabricated emergencies. Perfectly executed. A web of deceit so intricate, so detailed. My own talent turned against me. Their final act was a phone call to me, just as I was leaving the house. It was Brian. "Hey, honey, we're running a little late. Stuck in traffic. Can you just grab the table? We'll be there in 20 minutes. Nicole is with me." So I did. I sat. And I waited. 20 minutes became 30. 30 became an hour. I ordered a glass of water. I checked my phone. No new messages. The looks from the other diners started to change. First, curiosity, then pity. That awful, sticky pity that makes you feel like an insect under a microscope. I was a public spectacle of abandonment. The private gaslighting had become a public crucifixion, designed to irrevocably, undeniably, break my spirit. And it almost worked. I could feel the tears welling, the hot shame creeping up my neck. The narrative they had built was cementing around me. There's that fragile, paranoid Melissa having another one of her episodes. Her husband and sister probably couldn't take it anymore. I was about to crumble, to pay for the water and flee into the night, confirming their story for them. But then, something happened. The waiter approached. His name was Andrew. He'd refilled my water glass twice already, his movements discreet, professional. But this time was different. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with recognition. He saw the architecture of the cruelty. He knew this wasn't an accident. He saw what they had done. He topped off my water, his face impassive. But as he pulled the pitcher away, his other hand moved, quick and subtle. He discreetly left a folded napkin on the table beside my plate. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod and walked away. For a full minute, I just stared at it. It was a foreign object in the sterile landscape of my humiliation. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I unfolded it under the table, hidden from the pitying eyes. On the napkin was a name, his, and a note. 7 words. 7 words that changed everything. I've seen them here before. I know. External validation. It was the first piece of objective data I had received in over a year. A single, verifiable fact in a universe of emotional manipulation. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't hysterical. I wasn't broken, I was right. The sky was blue. It had always been blue. In that moment, sitting alone amid the wreckage they had made of my birthday, something inside me didn't just break. It calcified. It hardened into something cold and clear and sharp. The anxious, hopeful woman who had meticulously planned this dinner was hollowed out. And in her place, the analyst woke up. Justice, I realized, would not be found in a courtroom. A court could divide assets, but it could not prosecute cruelty. There is no legal recourse for making a woman believe she is losing her mind. No, the system was designed to ignore my pain. So I would have to design a new one. A system that would guarantee they could never ignore it again. My demeanor shifted, the tears evaporated. The shame vanished. I sat up straight. I caught Andrew's eye across the room and gave him that same tiny nod. Acknowledgement, alliance. I calmly gestured for the wine list. When the sommelier arrived, I didn't hesitate. I ordered the most expensive glass of champagne on the menu, a vintage that cost more than my first car. When it arrived, I held the crystal flute up. I raised it in a silent toast to the empty chairs. To my parents, to his, and to my sister, a salute to the ghosts of my past life. I took a single, deliberate sip. The champagne was crisp and cold and sharp, like clarity, like purpose. I placed the glass back on the table, barely touched. I paid the bill in cash, including a very generous tip for Andrew, and I stood. I walked out of that restaurant, my back straight, leaving the full, untouched table behind me as a monument to their failure. They expected tears. They would be disappointed. They thought they were throwing me a crucifixion. They had no idea they were hosting my coronation. The party they planned was over, but mine was just beginning. That night, sitting alone at my birthday dinner, I was meant to be the victim in a story they had written for me. For one long, humiliating hour, I played the part. I felt the stares, the pity, the quiet satisfaction of strangers witnessing a woman's unraveling. They had built me a prison of public shame, and I was supposed to just sit in it. They expected me to crumble, to flee, to call them in tears, confirming the narrative they had so carefully constructed, that I was fragile, paranoid, unstable. A problem to be managed. But they made a critical error. They underestimated their audience. A waiter, a stranger named Andrew, saw the truth of the stage they had set. With 7 simple words scribbled on a napkin, he handed me a new script. I've seen them here before. I know. It wasn't a guess, it was data. And with that single piece of external validation, the woman they thought they knew died in that chair. The homemaker, the wife, the sister, she was gone. In her place, the analyst I used to be woke from a 15-year slumber. The world snapped back into focus. The fuzzy emotional landscape I had been navigating was replaced by the stark, beautiful clarity of numbers and facts. I walked out of that restaurant not as a victim, but as a predator who had just caught the scent of her prey. They had wanted to throw me a party of pity and despair. They had no idea that what they had actually planned was my war council. My revenge wouldn't be a messy, emotional outburst, it would be an audit. A meticulous, systematic, and complete liquidation of their lives. That night, when I returned to the home they thought we shared, I didn't weep. I went to work. The first step in any hostile takeover is to secure your own assets. Before I could dismantle their world, I had to build a fortress in the digital shadows to protect my own. For 15 years, my life had been an open book. Shared accounts, linked calendars, a digital footprint intertwined with theirs like a hopelessly tangled vine. I had to become a ghost. It started with a new email address, something sterile and untraceable. No part of my name, no familiar numbers. It was the digital equivalent of a clean room. From there, I opened a new bank account with an online-only bank, one with no physical branches, headquartered in a state we'd never visited. I funded it with a series of small, calculated cashback rewards I'd been accumulating on a personal credit card for years, digital pocket change he never bothered to track. It was a pittance, but it was a start. It was mine. Next came the burner phone. I paid cash at a convenience store 20 miles from my home. The phone's sole purpose was to be the key to my new, firewalled life. It was the two-factor authentication for my secret accounts, a communication device that existed entirely outside the ecosystem of our marriage. I was building a parallel identity, one that operated by a different set of rules, my rules. While he slept beside me, the deep, untroubled sleep of a man confident in his own deceptions, I worked. Night after night, I sat in the dark, the quiet clicks of the keyboard the only sound. I became a digital archaeologist, excavating the ruins of our shared financial history. The first dig was our joint checking account. Brian handled the big picture finances, the investments, the retirement accounts. He encouraged it. You have a gift for making a house a home, Melissa. Let me handle the dirty business of making the money. It was a compliment that doubled as a cage. He wanted me to see the household budget, the grocery bills, the mortgage payments. He never wanted me to see the machinery behind it all. But I had built that machinery with him. Before I gave up my career, I had designed the very spreadsheets he now used to track our wealth. I knew where the bodies were buried because I had helped dig the graves. I started a new spreadsheet, clean, clinical, columns for date, amount, payee, and a final damning column labeled purpose. For 2 nights, I did nothing but populate this document, every transaction for the past 2 years. Credit cards, checking, savings, our home equity line of credit. I was a machine processing data, stripping away the emotional context. A dinner wasn't a memory. It was a charge at a specific restaurant on a specific date. A gift wasn't a token of affection. It was a debit from a jewelry store. The patterns began to emerge, faint at first, then undeniable. There were the small things. Lunches for 2 at expensive restaurants in the middle of the workday. Bar tabs on nights he was supposedly working late. A recurring charge for a high-end floral delivery service. And the flowers weren't coming to our house. These were the wounds of a typical affair. The cliches. They were hurtful, yes, but they were common, predictable. It was the other pattern that chilled me to the bone. The one that spoke not of infidelity, but of a conspiracy. Large recurring cash withdrawals. Always just under the $10,000 limit that would trigger an automatic report. Payments to unknown vendors from our home equity line. Thousands of dollars disappearing into a digital fog. This wasn't a man funding a few secret dinners. This was a man funding a secret life. He called them investment expenses. Consulting fees. Vague, corporate-sounding labels meant to deflect and intimidate. He was counting on me to be the homemaker, the one who didn't understand the dirty business of making money. He forgot who I was. He forgot that I speak this language better than he does. I found the first big thread on the 3rd night. A check written from our investment account. The payee wasn't a person. It was a limited liability company, an LLC I had never heard of. NB Designs, it was called. A quick search of the state's corporate database gave me the registration documents. Public record. It had been formed 6 months ago. The registered agent, the official point of contact, was listed as a generic corporate services company, a dead end. But the filing documents also listed the organizers, the people who created the company. There were 2 names. The first was Brian's, no surprise there. The second was Nicole's. I remember the silence in the house. The hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own breathing. I felt nothing. There was no hot rush of anger, no wave of grief. The part of me that could have felt those things had been cauterized in the restaurant. This wasn't a shock. It was a confirmation. It was the final, missing piece of the puzzle locking into place with a cold, definitive click. NB Designs. Nicole Bryan Designs. Of course. My sister had always dabbled in interior design, a hobby she'd dreamed of turning into a career. A dream I had encouraged. A dream I had offered to help fund. It seemed they had found another investor. They weren't just having an affair. This was grand larceny disguised as a midlife crisis. They were systematically draining our marital assets, my assets, the returns on the life and career I had invested in our family, to build a new life for themselves. My grandmother's ring wasn't taken to be cleaned. It was pawned, a seed investment for their new venture. The surprise investment Brian had lied about wasn't for us. It was for them. They weren't just cheating on me. They were erasing me, replacing me piece by piece using my own money to do it. I closed the laptop. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, my hand perfectly steady. I looked out the window at the dark, manicured lawn of the home I had built, the home they were stealing from under my feet. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, it was almost perfect, a perfect crime. And in that moment, I felt a strange, cold surge of admiration for the sheer audacity of it, the meticulous planning, the long game. They had mistaken my love for stupidity, my trust for weakness. They had treated me like a mark, and now I would treat them like a target. The next day, I began the second phase, the performance. My grief had to be public, but it had to be the right kind of grief. The kind he had already advertised to our friends and family. I called our friends. I told them about the birthday dinner. I cried. I sounded confused, heartbroken, lost. I just don't understand, I'd whisper into the phone. He said he was stuck in traffic, but he never came. And Nicole was with him. I must have gotten the time wrong. Or the place. I've been so forgetful lately. Brian's been so worried about me. I was reinforcing his narrative. I was confirming my own instability. It was the perfect cover. A woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown is not a woman anyone suspects of plotting a corporate takedown. She is an object of pity, invisible. And from that position of invisibility, I could move undetected. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the people who were trying to bury me. Brian and Nicole were magnificent in their roles. They were models of strained compassion. They'd exchange worried glances over my head when they thought I wasn't looking. Brian would sigh, telling our friends how hard this was, how he was trying to be patient with my episodes. Nicole would bring me soup. She'd sit with me at the kitchen table, her hand over mine, her eyes full of a deep, fraudulent sorrow. "Liz, I am so sorry," she said one afternoon, her voice a perfect imitation of sisterly concern. "The traffic was it was a nightmare. Our phones died. By the time we got there, you were gone. We were worried sick." I looked into the eyes of the sister I had shared a room with for 16 years. The woman who had been my maid of honor. The woman who was systematically dismantling my life and stealing my husband, and I smiled. A weak, watery, grateful smile. "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry I overreacted. I haven't been myself." Every word was a lie. Every tear was a tactic. My grief was a weapon, and I was aiming it right at the heart of their new life. While they were busy managing my decline, I was mapping out their destruction. I spent my days in a performance of sorrow and my nights in a frenzy of strategic planning. On my new clean laptop, I created a different kind of spreadsheet. Not a record of the past, but a blueprint for the future. A war plan. My revenge would have 3 pillars. 3 fronts in a coordinated assault designed not just to expose them, but to leave them with absolutely nothing. Pillar 1. Social ruin. They had used my social circle as a theater for my humiliation. I would turn that same theater into their tribunal. They had built a narrative of my instability. I would build an airtight case of their treachery, backed by incontrovertible proof. Our friends wouldn't just know the truth. They would be forced to choose a side, and I would make it impossible for them to choose the wrong one. Pillar 2. Professional ruin, NB Designs. Their precious new venture, funded with my future. I would become its most devoted, secret saboteur. I would study their business plan, their potential clients, their market, and then I would poison the well. I would use my knowledge of their weaknesses, Brian's arrogance, Nicole's insecurity, to turn their dream into a public, catastrophic failure. Pillar 3, financial ruin. This was personal. This was about reclamation. Every dollar they had stolen, every asset they had leveraged, I would claw back, but I wouldn't just reclaim it. I would use the financial system they had exploited to trap them in a prison of debt. They wanted to build a new life? Fine. They would start from a hole so deep they would never see the sun again. The first step was to gather intelligence. I needed to know everything about their business. I hired a private investigator, an old contact from my analyst days. I used the burner phone and paid him from my secret account. He was discreet, expensive, and ruthlessly efficient. I didn't want dirt on their affair. The affair was merely a symptom. I wanted corporate espionage. I wanted to know about their clients, their suppliers, their financial backers. I wanted a complete picture of the machine so I could find the gears that, when broken, would cause the entire thing to seize up and explode. While he worked, I focused on setting the stage. The perfect opportunity presented itself a few weeks later. Brian was hosting a dinner party, a small gathering of his most important business contacts and their wives. It was a command performance for me. I was to be the quiet, elegant, supportive wife, the perfect hostess, a living testament to the stable home life that made his professional success possible. He had no idea I was about to use his stage to audition for a brand new role. The day of the party, Nicole came over to help. It was a reconnaissance mission, of course. She wanted to assess my mental state, ensure I was still playing my part. She floated through my kitchen, arranging flowers, her face a mask of sympathy. "How are you holding up, Liz?" she asked, her voice soft. "Really?" I was pulling a roast from the oven, the heat warming my face. I gave her a tired, fragile smile. "I'm trying. I really am. It's just, some days are harder than others." I leaned in as if sharing a secret, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I've been thinking. I have all this money just sitting in my old inheritance account. It's not doing anything. And I know you've been wanting to get your design business off the ground." I let the offer hang in the air. A hook, baited with my own money. I was testing her, testing the depths of her greed. Her eyes lit up just for a second, before being replaced by a performance of reluctance. "Oh, Liz, no. I couldn't, not now. You need to focus on yourself." "No, really," I insisted, pressing the advantage. "It would make me happy to see you succeed, to invest in something, in family." I smiled at her, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Think about it. My silent partner. She left that afternoon promising to consider it. The hook was set. She would take the bait. It was only a matter of time. The greed that had allowed her to betray me would now be the instrument of her undoing. That evening, as our guests arrived, I was the picture of grace. I wore a simple black dress. My smile was warm, my laugh was light. Brian watched me, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. His broken little bird was singing on command. I moved through the conversations, a ghost in my own home. I listened to the wives of his partners. I learned about their children, their vacations, their charities. I filed every detail away. I was no longer a friend. I was a researcher, gathering data points for the social execution to come. The real work began after dinner. Brian was holding court in the living room, pontificating about the market, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. I was in the kitchen, clearing plates, playing the dutiful wife. One of the wives, a woman named Catherine, whose husband was Brian's biggest client, came in to offer help. She was a kind woman, genuinely concerned. She placed a hand on my arm. "Melissa, how are you, dear? Brian told us you've been having a tough time." I let my perfect hostess mask crumble. I let the tears well in my eyes. I looked at her, my expression a carefully crafted portrait of a woman at her breaking point. "Oh, Catherine," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I don't know what to do. He thinks I'm falling apart. He keeps talking about these investments, this new project he's so excited about. He won't tell me what it is. He says I'll just worry. I dabbed my eyes with a napkin. He's probably right. I'm just so anxious all the time. I even thought I lost my grandmother's ring. He'd taken it to be cleaned, can you imagine? I was a wreck. I was seeding the ground, planting his own lies back into his own social circle, but with a new, subtle spin. I wasn't denying his narrative. I was confirming it, but from a place of helpless confusion that invited sympathy, not judgment. I was the worried wife, not the paranoid shrew. Catherine's expression softened. She pulled me into a hug. Oh, you poor thing. Men can be so thoughtless. I'm sure he means well. I'm sure he does, I said, letting a single perfect tear roll down my cheek. I'm sure he does. When the last guest had left, Brian came into the kitchen beaming. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. You were perfect tonight, honey. Absolutely perfect. I leaned back against him, my body rigid. It was a lovely evening, I said, my voice a dead monotone. He either didn't notice or didn't care. He was too high on his own success. See? I told you everything would be fine. You just need to trust me. I looked at our reflection in the dark kitchen window. The happy couple. A complete and utter fiction. He thought he was looking at his wife. He had no idea he was embracing his executioner. The pieces were in place. The traps were set. The performance was in full swing. They thought they were in the final act of my tragedy. They had no idea they were merely the opening scene of my masterpiece. My performance as the grieving, unstable wife was a masterpiece of deception. While they watched me with a mixture of pity and contempt, smug in their belief that they had broken me, I was moving silently in the shadows of their lives, gathering my weapons. My grief was a cloak of invisibility. Underneath it, the analyst was at war. I mapped their conspiracy, tracing the flow of my stolen money into the hollow shell of their shared dream, NB Designs. The affair was a petty insult. The systematic theft of my future, however, was a declaration of war. They saw me as a patient to be managed. I saw them as an asset to be liquidated. I played my part to perfection. I cried on cue. I feigned confusion. I dangled my own inheritance as bait for my sister, watching the greed flicker in her eyes. I hosted their parties, smiling my broken smile, all while planting the seeds of their social destruction. Every sympathetic hug I received was an intelligence-gathering mission. Every tear I shed was a strategic investment in the narrative that would eventually consume them. They thought they were the directors of my tragedy, arranging the final, pathetic scenes of my decline. They had no idea I had rewritten the script. The stage was set, the traps were laid, and the players were all in position. They were about to learn that the woman they had tried to erase was, in fact, the author of their ending. The second act was over. It was time for the curtain to rise on the third. The first pillar to fall would be the professional one, NB Designs. It was the foundation of their new life, the monument they were building on the rubble of mine. So I decided to demolish it before the first brick was even laid. My private investigator had delivered. His report was a thing of beauty, concise, detailed, and utterly damning. He had uncovered the identity of the primary investor they were courting, Catherine's husband, Robert Vance, Brian's biggest client. The man whose respect Brian craved like a drug. They had pitched him a luxury residential design project, a small, exclusive development for which they needed a significant capital injection. The entire future of NB Designs hinged on this one deal. I didn't go to Robert. Men like Robert Vance hear pitches from men like Brian all day. They speak the same language of bravado and risk. No, my target was Catherine. I had laid the groundwork with her at the dinner party, presenting myself as a confused, anxious wife worried about her husband's secretive new venture. Now it was time for the follow-up. I called her and asked for a private meeting. I framed it as a desperate plea for advice. She agreed immediately, her voice full of that maternal sympathy I had so carefully cultivated. We met in her office. I let her steer the conversation at first, letting her ask how I was, her brow furrowed with concern. I played my part, the fragile woman on the verge of collapse. Then, with trembling hands, I pushed the folder across the table. Catherine, I began, my voice a carefully modulated whisper. I'm so sorry to do this, I feel like I'm going crazy. Brian keeps talking about this investment, and he's so secretive. I did some digging. I know I shouldn't have. And I found this. She opened the folder. She saw the names. Her eyes widened slightly, I saw the first flicker of doubt. The connection had been made. My sister, I said, my voice breaking. He told me she's just a consultant. But this looks like they're partners. And Catherine, there's more. I then walked her through a curated selection of the financial data, not the petty affair expenses. That would be messy, emotional. This was business. I showed her the large, systematic withdrawals from our home equity line of credit, the line of credit secured by the house that was half mine. I showed her how these withdrawals corresponded perfectly with the timeline of the LLC's formation. He's not using his own money, Catherine. He's leveraging our family home, my home. He's gambling with my financial security without my knowledge or consent. I framed it not as an act of infidelity, but as an act of reckless financial endangerment. I wasn't the scorned wife. I was the responsible partner whose assets were being exposed to catastrophic risk by an unstable and secretive husband. I was speaking her language, the language of risk mitigation. The final piece was the business plan itself, which my PI had managed to acquire. I pointed to their projections, their absurdly optimistic revenue forecasts. I used to be an analyst, I said quietly, as if ashamed to admit it. These numbers, they're not just optimistic. They're fantasy. The material costs are underestimated by at least 40%. He hasn't factored in any of the new zoning variances. This isn't a business plan. It's a suicide note. I had taken their dream and reframed it as a toxic asset. I wasn't just exposing a cheater. I was exposing a bad investment. Catherine closed the folder. Her expression was no longer sympathetic. It was cold. It was the look of a CEO who has just been made aware of a significant liability. She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't see a fragile housewife. She saw a fellow analyst. "Thank you for bringing this to me, Melissa," she said, her voice crisp and final. "I appreciate your candor." I knew then that I had won. NB Designs was dead. Robert Vance would never invest in a project built on marital fraud and fantastical numbers, brought to his wife's attention by the unstable wife of his partner. The reputational risk was too high. Brian wouldn't just lose the deal. He would lose the confidence of his most important client. The fallout would be catastrophic. He came home that night in a rage. The deal was off. Robert had pulled out without giving a clear reason. Something about unforeseen complications. Brian was apoplectic. He paced the living room, ranting about Robert's disloyalty, about the market, about bad luck. He never once suspected me. How could he? I was in the kitchen, quietly making dinner, the picture of supportive, oblivious domesticity. I listened to his fury, and I felt nothing but the quiet hum of a successful transaction. Pillar 1 had crumbled. Now for Pillar 2, the financial ruin. My meeting with my divorce attorney was efficient. I didn't cry. I didn't rail against his infidelity. I presented it as a corporate dissolution. I handed her a thick binder, meticulously organized, containing every piece of financial data I had compiled. Every hidden account, every falsified expense, every dollar they had siphoned. I had spreadsheets, bank statements, and a clear, documented timeline of the fraud. My instructions were simple. I didn't want a settlement. I wanted a verdict. He has committed financial fraud, I stated, my voice even. He has deliberately and systematically converted marital assets for personal gain with his business partner, who is also his affair partner and my sister. I want a forensic accountant appointed by the court. I want every asset frozen. And I want an injunction filed against NB Designs, preventing them from liquidating any assets or taking on any new debt until the audit is complete. I was using the law as the weapon it was designed to be, a cold, impartial instrument of consequence. The affair was emotionally devastating, but legally it was just leverage. The fraud, however, the fraud was everything. It was a clear, demonstrable breach of fiduciary duty. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, looked at me over the top of her glasses. She smiled, a thin, predatory smile. "This," she said, tapping the binder, "is a work of art." They were served a week later. The effect was immediate. Their bank accounts were frozen. Their credit lines were suspended. The injunction meant that NB Designs was paralyzed, legally forbidden from conducting any business. They were trapped. They had built a beautiful cage for themselves, and I had just slammed the door and thrown away the key. The phone call started immediately. First Brian, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. Then Nicole, hysterical, sobbing, accusing. I didn't answer. I let them leave frantic, rambling voicemails. I listened to them later as dispassionately as if I were listening to market reports. Their panic was just another data point, a confirmation of a successful strategy. They had nowhere to turn. Their secret source of funding, me, was now their chief prosecutor. They had no income, no access to capital, and a mountain of legal fees on the horizon. The dream was now a nightmare of debt and litigation. Pillar 2 had turned to dust, which brought me to the final pillar, the most important one, social ruin. The stage for the final act would be a charity gala, an annual event that was the centerpiece of our social calendar. Everyone would be there. Our friends. Our family's Brian's business associates. It was the perfect venue for a public execution. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I continued my performance. I was the heartbroken wife, forced into a divorce I never wanted. I confided in our friends, telling them that I had discovered Brian's affair and was devastated, but that I wanted to handle things with dignity. I never mentioned the money. I never mentioned the fraud. I let them believe this was a simple, tragic story of infidelity. I needed their sympathy. I needed them on my side before the final revelation. I bought a new dress for the gala. A stunning, blood-red gown. It was a declaration. A promise. I arrived alone. Brian was already there with Nicole. They were trying to project an image of solidarity, a united front. They stood together a little too close, whispering to people, no doubt continuing to spin their narrative of my instability. When they saw me, their faces froze. They had expected me to stay home, shattered and weeping. They did not expect this. They did not expect the red dress. I ignored them. I moved through the room, greeting people warmly. I was calm, I was gracious, I was composed, I was giving the performance of my life. The main event of the evening was a live auction. The final item was always a surprise, something spectacular. This year, the auctioneer announced it was a one-of-a-kind piece of jewelry, donated by a generous, anonymous benefactor. A gasp went through the room. And there you have it. A revenge served ice cold. She dismantled their lives pillar by pillar. But in the end, the victory was hollow. She got her justice, but had to burn down a part of herself to do it. Thank you so much for staying for this entire journey. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please hit that like button. And I really want to know your take. Do you think the revenge was worth the price? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We dive into powerful narratives like this every single week. To make sure you don't miss the next one, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And finally, if you want to support the channel, the single best thing you can do is share this video with one person you know who loves a dark, calculated thriller. Until next time, stay sharp. It was my ring. Everyone knew that ring. It was as much a part of my identity as my own name. I saw Brian's face. The blood drained from it. He looked at Nicole, who was staring at the screen, her mouth agape in horror. The auctioneer began his patter. This exquisite vintage piece has a fascinating story, he began, but I didn't let him finish. I raised my hand, not to bid, to speak. Excuse me, I said. My voice was steady. A hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to me. I believe I can shed some light on the provenance of that piece. I walked slowly, deliberately, towards the stage. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. I could feel Brian's and Nicole's burning into my back. I took the microphone from the stunned auctioneer. I turned to face the audience. I found my parents in the crowd, their faces etched with confusion. I found his parents looking bewildered. I found Catherine Vance, who was watching me with a knowing, almost imperceptible nod. That ring, I began, my voice clear and strong, belonged to my grandmother. It is a family heirloom, and it is priceless to me. I thought I had lost it. My husband, I turned and looked directly at Brian, pinning him in place with my gaze, told me he had taken it to be cleaned as a surprise for my birthday. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Imagine my surprise when I was contacted by a reputable local pawnbroker who had the good sense to run a check on such a unique item before melting it down. He found that it had been reported stolen by my insurance company. Another collective gasp. I could see Brian shaking his head, a gesture of desperate denial. It was pawned, I continued, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the crowd in, on the same day that my husband and my sister. Nicole! I turned my gaze to her and she physically flinched, as if I had struck her, registered their new business, NB Designs. A business they funded by systematically draining my inheritance and leveraging our family home. All without my knowledge, I paused. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum, waiting to be filled by the truth. They told me I was crazy, neurotic, paranoid. For months, they worked to convince me and everyone around me that I was losing my mind. Why? So that when I finally discovered their affair and their fraud, no one would believe me. I looked around the room, making eye contact with our friends, the people I had confided in, the people whose sympathy I had so carefully cultivated. I saw the dawning comprehension in their eyes. The pity they had felt for me was now curdling into disgust for them. They didn't just try to steal my money and my husband, I said, my voice ringing with a cold, final clarity. They tried to steal my sanity. They tried to erase me. So tonight I am reclaiming what is mine. I am donating the proceeds from this auction, after I buy the ring back myself, of course, to a charity that supports victims of gaslighting and psychological abuse. I looked directly at Brian and Nicole one last time. Their faces were ashen masks of public ruin. Because no one should ever be made to feel like a stranger in their own life. I placed the microphone back on the stand. The silence held for a beat and then the room erupted. Not in applause. In a low, furious murmur, people were turning to look at Brian and Nicole, their expressions a mixture of shock and contempt. The socialites were shunning them. Their friends were turning their backs. It was over. The narrative they had built was a pile of ash at my feet. Pillar 3 had not just crumbled, it had been obliterated. I walked off the stage, bought my ring back with a single, decisive bid, and left the gala without another word. The aftermath was quiet. Brian and Nicole were social pariahs. His business collapsed under the weight of the scandal and the lawsuit. They were forced to declare bankruptcy. They lost everything. The house, the cars, the respect of everyone they had ever known. They left town, disappearing into a self-imposed exile of shame and debt. I won the divorce. I got everything. The house. The assets, my name. My life, the law for once was just. I sit here now in this quiet house. The home I built. The home I defended. It is all mine. The victory is total. It is complete. It is a hollow. There is a cost to this kind of war. To win, I had to become like them. Methodical, unfeeling, cruel. I had to hollow out that hopeful, trusting woman and build a fortress in her place. And a fortress, by its nature, is a lonely place. I look at my grandmother's ring sparkling on my finger. I won it back. I won everything back. But the woman who wore it with such innocent pride is gone forever. I destroyed my enemies, yes, but I had to burn down a part of myself to do it. The question that haunts me in the quiet moments is not whether they deserved it. They did. The question is, was it worth the price? Was the satisfaction of their destruction worth the destruction of my own innocence? I have my justice. I have my revenge. And I have my answer. I just don't know if I can live with it.